Good morning, everyone. This morning, I'm going to take you on the first part of my life as a part of my icebreaker for the Pathways program. It's Charles E. Radney, The Formative Years. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my parents, Charlie and Christine. They were part of the Great Migration, which is where Black people from the South moved to the North during the 1950 to 1960. Like everyone else, I started out as a child. But my start was a little bit rockier than some. I was born with a congenital birth defect, something I inherited from my grandfather. It was an issue with my hands that over my life would challenge me in several ways, but not be the issue that some people might think it would be. The first home I lived in was a two-story home that my dad and his sister purchased. It was in a working class neighborhood in Cleveland, Ohio. Two-story house. Upstairs was my mom, my dad, myself. Downstairs was my paternal grandfather, 3 aunts, 1 uncle, and 2 cousins in the same size house. So you can see the difference in the challenges that we have between living space from one spot to the other. My neighborhood was a working class neighborhood, all Black neighborhood in Cleveland, Ohio. My mom from the very beginning was intent on me being able to interact with people. So prior to going to school, prior to joining kindergarten, she had been a preschool called the Friendly Inn Settlement. So every day she would pack a lunch for me, walk me down there, leave me. And at the initial part, it felt like I was being left, leave me, and then come back after I'd had a chance to interact with other children. One of the common misconceptions within the world community, or especially in America, is that white men can't jump and Black men can't swim. My son, when he joined the Marine Corps, was ostracized by one of his higher ups because they didn't think he could swim, and they were totally shocked to find out he could. My dad made sure I could swim, and he took me to the local neighborhood recreation center as a young child so I could learn how to swim. When I was young, there were no major grocery store chains. There were markets. And on Saturday, my parents would go to the market, and the market consisted of a lot of different booths. They had meat stands, they had vegetable stands. They also had an older Italian gentleman who had a shoe repair shop. And when I was old enough for my parents to need to have me right behind them the whole time, I would spend my time while they were shopping with the gentleman in the shoe shop and learning about his country, Italy. And during that, he made me promise that at some point in my life, I would go to his country. Still haven't fulfilled it, but it's still on my bucket list. Growing up in the South, my mom was a part of St. Paul's Episcopal Church. When she moved to Cleveland, she and her sister both joined St. Andrew's Episcopal Church, and that was the church I was raised in. Now, the real plus for being raised in that type church, here again, an all-Black church, was that there was an engineer there. There were doctors there. There were teachers there. There were lawyers there. So it gave a young Black man the opportunity to understand that he could do other things other than just being a laborer. Growing up, one of the best things I remember, one of the cherished memories for me, is the every other year visit to my maternal grandparents' farm in Tennessee. Had so many different adventures, and as you can see in the picture on the right, I was a happy little kid. Up until the time I was 10, I was a single child. At 10, I had a little sister, the love of my life, my Pisces, Velma. Also around the same age of 10, I started going to the library with my dad on a regular basis. Now, the reason my dad was going to the library was even though he did not finish the 6th grade, actually formally, he was a self-taught person. And he, through the GI Bill, took the the courses to become a TV repair person. Once he had done that, and part of that course was actually building the test equipment. Once he opened up his business, he found that there were so many different televisions and so many different radios that no one place could have all the information. The information was at the libraries, however, but it was spread out over 5 different libraries. So consequently, on a regular basis, we were constantly at those 5 libraries. It gave me a chance at the age of 10 to start really reading. It opened up the world for me with things like James Bond and other things. The elementary school I initially went to was right across the street from my house. However, in the 4th grade, I tested into the special ed part, or not special ed, but the higher ed, and had to go to a different school. And in going to that school, I learned how to play the trumpet, learned French from a French teacher who was actually a part of my church. Because my mother had already introduced me to Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, that really came in handy, because the new school and the old school on a regular basis had an annual summer fight. I also at that time started to really appreciate jazz, and Wes Montgomery was my first. The next phase of my education was junior high. The school was called Kennard Junior High School. Regular, just inner city high school or junior high at that point. But for me, it was traumatic because my first year there, my social studies teacher was fired by the city of Cleveland because he supposedly was trying to indoctrinate everyone to become Black nationalists. That was not the case. It made me become very curious about the whole political thing. And Don Freeman is a lifelong friend based on that. He was that teacher. My high school, a 4-story monstrosity that both Harrison Dillard and Jesse Owens had gone to, was East Technical High School. Now, if you consider the fact that they graduated there in 1936 and I got there in 1965, you can understand how old and outdated that school was at that point. The second uprooting in my life was when the city of Cleveland used a term that today still bothers the heck out of me, called eminent domain. They felt it was necessary to uproot a whole community to put in a housing project, which caused my parents and the other people in the neighborhood who own their homes to have to go out and search for new homes. Now, understanding in the 60s and 70s, redlining in real estate and steering in real estate were still very popular processes. And they typically tried to steer Black people away from white neighborhoods. We, however, ended up in Warrensville Heights, which at that time was a very, very white neighborhood. And consequently, I went to Warrensville Heights High School. And at that time, out of the 600 people attending there were only 60 Black people. That was a challenge in several ways. But for me, being me, I got involved with the band. I got involved with the basketball team. I was the manager of the basketball team. We were division champs. I got my letter for that. The 60s were a very tumultuous time. There were the anti-war protests. There were the civil rights protests. And as a member of the Black Panther Party, I was very much involved in the free breakfast program. Around that same time, some of my friends had parents and relatives who were working for companies like General Motors and Ford Motor Company. And they had been there for a while. They were making good money. I was invited to come out and put in an application. I went out, put in the application, and was turned down. The man there said they have enough hand injuries there without hiring me. And when I went home and told my dad that, it was the second time in my life, and only the second time in my life, that I ever heard my dad use a curse word. Because of that denial of going to Ford Motor Company, I really got involved in my college education. My first school was Tri-C, which is Cuyahoga Community College. I majored in business administration and minored in poli-sci. My second school was the University of Akron. At Tri-C, I met Alan Hayes, and Alan Hayes and I became the best of friends. We raised our children together. We were inseparable until last year when he passed away. We together were, even though we were in Cleveland when it happened, when the incident at Kent State happened, we were on that campus within an hour to help the people we knew to get off that campus. Later that same year, we were at Yale University for the Free Bobby rally. Now, the significance of that is that we found out later that not only were we on that campus, but Hillary Rodham was also on that same campus at that same rally. At this point, you've got my life from birth to age 21. Does anyone have any questions about some of the challenges I had with my hands, some of the issues I had in being politically active?
This is Roz. Charles, I appreciate your story. And I understand in the 60s that a lot of that was going on around the world. How did you feel being in the midst of so much challenge and diversity and, you know, the segregation? And then, you know, I know that you had issues with your hands. How did you manage to develop to the person that you are today, which is remarkable?
I think what helped me develop to that point were a couple of things. First off, watching my dad's work ethic, seeing that he had came from the South, seeing that he had a limited education and that he self-educated himself and had his own business. So I had that entrepreneurial leadership. On the flip side, my mom was the person who introduced me, to, as I said, to the Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, which gave me a real leg up in understanding how to work with people. When I mentioned the fact that the original elementary school I went to and the one I got transferred to had an annual summer fight. Now, if you live in one neighborhood and go to school in the other, and those two schools fight every year, you got to learn how to manipulate or manage your way through people. Taking that to the next step, when I was involved in a more active political role, I will never forget when we were at Yale University and we didn't realize there had been a curfew. So it became one of those first times for me for situational leadership. As we were coming back to the campus and we're the only people out there, we are over the loudspeaker. They are now crossing the green. And we look around and realize that that person in that position to challenge us was looking at us. We were the only group out there. And I looked around at my friends and said, don't run, but walk fast as hell and let's get out of here. So yes, over the years, it's been a lot of learning how to interact with people, learning other cultures, being accepting of other cultures.
Thank you, Charles.
Roosevelt?
Oh, thank you, Charles. I took a train trip from Chicago to Allentown, Pennsylvania, which was recently voted or scored to be the second most racist city in America. But passing through Akron, Ohio, it was nighttime. And looking out the train window, we saw 3 crosses burning. And it got really scary. I thought it was 1950 for a minute. I was glad that train went by really fast and I was in it. My question is, do you think racism has gotten better or the same or worse over the last 50 years?
I think racism, let me answer that in 2 ways. I live in Fontana. And up until 1986 in Fontana, the Ku Klux Klan openly marched right down Sierra. Now, are those people gone? No, they're not open and visible, but they're not gone. I think the best way to answer your question, if you look at a lot of the turmoil we're dealing with now in this country, it shows the fact that there's some real underlying issues with where people want to be versus where people claim they are.